the CEO and COO of Treasury Careers. Thank you to everyone for taking the time to join us for our webinar today. CFOs expect more from AP, how to become an AP superhero. I'd like to thank our webinar partner today, Comdata, whose strong thought leadership helps us make this webinar possible today. AP leaders are faced with a myriad of challenges, and it suddenly feels like your CFO has a laser focus on accounts payable. Time to panic? Absolutely not. This is a tremendous and well-earned opportunity for accounts payable to get its due. Account payables, done right, can deliver strategic value across the enterprise. Today, you'll discover how companies of all sizes are leveraging accounts payable, automation, and developing e-payables programs to lower invoice processing and payment costs, mitigate payments risk, improve supplier relationships, and deliver strategic value across the enterprise. Before we delve into the content, I'm going to offer a few quick words about Treasury Careers and a few housekeeping items. TreasuryJobs.com recently launched Treasury Careers. Treasury Careers offers content and resources that empower Treasury professionals to own their career success. Post-Treasury job opportunities, have a vast array of Treasury certification resources, complimentary webinars like this one today, several white papers on best practices, and stay tuned for even more, coming soon, a new Treasury certification. A few housekeeping items. The slides are already available under the handouts area in your GoToWebinar control panel. We'll also be sending you links via email to the presentation and the recording over the next 24 hours. For those of you interested in CTP credit, you'll have to answer all polling questions and remain on for the duration of the webinar. If you have any questions on CTP credit, please send an email to ernie@treasurycareers.com. We'd like to hear from you, so please ask your questions at any time in the questions area of your GoToWebinar control panel. We do our best to get to your questions at the Q&A session at the tail end of the webinar. If we don't get your questions answered, we'll follow up with you after the webinar. Finally, we appreciate your consideration in taking a short survey at the end of the webinar today, as we always do our best to optimize the ROI we offer our event attendees for their valuable time. Our learning objectives. To you for taking your valuable time with us today. I'd like you to be able to understand the value proposition for AP automation and developing an e-payables program for your company. We'd like you to be able to motivate and engage your AP team to deliver best-in-class accounts payable function at your company, to develop and optimize an e-payables program at your company, and how to develop and communicate a winning business case for investment in AP automation. How are we going to do that today? What's our agenda today? We're going to have a brief overview on why AP now matters more than ever to CFOs, some accounts payable pain points, the strategic outcomes of AP automation, the art of making a case for AP automation. Then we're going to pivot to a virtual card overview and how to develop and optimize an e-payables program at your company. So the first part will focus a little bit more on the theory, and then on the back slide we'll welcome our featured speaker who will get us into how it's really done in practice. So really quickly, some introductory slides. Why AP? Why now? I've been speaking on webinars myself for 10 years. In the last 9 years previous to this year, I've never spoken on AP automation. This year, probably 12 times. Companies are realizing the strategic value of cash. Payments fraud is still rampant. We still write a bunch of checks. We're going to talk about why that's not such a good idea today. Companies are realizing the strategic value of improving supplier relationships. The data is available. The right technology is here and cost effective. This background also helps us in developing our business case for AP automation. For those of you who haven't been in the weeds yet, you'll see that there are many people and parties involved in the AP process. So the more people that are involved, the more systems that are involved, the more manual processes that are involved. These are all going to introduce risk, and they're also going to introduce cost to the process. So this is an interesting slide that you might want to print out. So again, it's people, systems, and those processes. Strategic, talked about that as a motivator. The value in negotiating and taking discounts. Really quickly, if you are offered one term net 30, you receive a 1% discount if payment received within 10 days. The effective cost of not taking that discount is 18%. A lot of times companies don't have visibility into the discounts that they might have the opportunity to take, and not taking those discounts is usually quite costly to companies. There's also value in that visibility. Lets us accurately forecast our cash, which makes our working capital optimization possible, especially if we're a net borrower. It also gives us visibility into our payments portfolio. So we'll talk later in the webinar about the value of leveraging electronic payments. So it's fairly costly to leverage certain types of payments. So payments fraud is rampant. AFP fraud, payments fraud and control survey, I think the number this year is actually 74% of companies. There is still, payments fraud is still rampant. You'll see that on this slide really quickly. Where it's happening most is wire transfers, but it's still happening. And if you look at it, guess what? Checks are still the highest percentage by over 20%. So payments fraud is rampant. There are risk exposures, especially if you're writing checks. And one of the things we'll talk about is how that e-payables program and AP automation can mitigate and remove some of those sources of application. Just some pain points. So what you want to do, identify your pain points in making that business case. How can AP automation and e-payables program take those away? Again, discounts lost, ineffective working capital management. We can have costly payments method, and we can have cumbersome controls. Just this slide for you to take a look at and print out and take a look at. It just gets at some of the costs that it costs that much to process a single invoice. If you don't know this, it'd be very good for you to figure out how much it costs you to pay a single invoice. On the study that I have referenced here from Arden Partners, $15.55 to pay a single invoice. I think that's middle of the road. I've seen as high as $30. You look at that, $9.34 to cut a check, 28.5 days to pay the invoice receipt. So when we look at automation, e-payables program, we'll see how those costs are going to drop dramatically. So as the number of invoices that you process goes higher, and then the types of payments that you use, and then cutting down the time it takes to even process the invoice allows you to take advantage of those invoice cost savings. So let's go ahead and launch our first polling question. So first polling question is just asking you which of the following is your management team most concerned with relations to accounts payable. So it's probably going to give you some idea of why you're on the webinar today. So what's your motivation for being here? So again, a few quick notes. We'd love to take your questions at any time in the questions area of the GoToWebinar control panel. And also those of you who are interested in receiving CTP credits, you'll have to stay on for the duration of the webinar and answer all of our polling questions. So I'm going to go ahead and leave the polling question up for another 10 or 15 seconds or go, and then we'll go ahead and take a quick look at those results, and then we'll go ahead and wrap up our additional comments, and then we'll welcome Mitra Aycock to the webinar. So I'm going to go ahead and close the polling question, and I'm going to go ahead and share those results. And just about what I expected, reducing the money and reducing the time it takes. So the time and the money, but of course also reducing the IT. So later on, Mitra will tell us how it's possible to reduce the time and money in implementing that e-payables program. So thank you for participating in our polling question. So this is another slide for you to take a look at. After the webinar is over, it just tries to give you a sense of what that cost is to process an invoice. So especially if you're in manufacturing, 3 to 5 way processing, there's journal entries, the approval, the workflow, so it helps you get that sense there. So strategic outcomes of AP automation in theory: eliminates payment of duplicate invoices, suboptimal payments methods, allows for discounts, removes errors caused by manual, mitigates payment fraud risk. You have that control, audit trail, transparency, visibility, creates that culture of continuous improvement, and also allows your employees to focus on more strategic activities. So how do you make that effective business case for AP automation? One, you want to establish the key pain points your company is facing relative to your AP process, accurately define the lay of the land to issues you want to address, people, process, technology. You want to offer multiple solutions to address issues that show you've done your homework. You want to have a cost-benefit analysis that's easily defensible, accurate numbers, and shows how you impact the bottom line. You're going to want an executive summary that concisely delivers the urgency in addressing those issues. You need to know your constituency. And as far as the presentation of the business case, that's really important as well. You want to present with confidence and passion. You want to clearly define the roles and responsibilities and establish accountabilities with stakeholders. You want to show people how the projects fit together. And finally, maybe most importantly, you want to define success, measure it, and also communicate it to all those involved in the process. So Now it is my distinct pleasure to welcome Mitra Aycock, Vice President of Product at Comdata, to the webinar. Mitra is a seasoned veteran in the payments industry with a diverse background in development, product servicing, and relationship management. Mitra, the floor is yours. Please take it away. Thank you.
Thank you, Ernie. And I'll start with just a brief overview of Comdata, because I understand not everyone may have heard of us. We are not a bank. We are a technology company and pride ourselves on our flexibility in being such. We are solely focused on payments, so our business is B2B payments. We've been around for roughly 60 years and started our time in the over-the-road trucking space and have blossomed from there. But that said, we only address B2B payments. We are very unique in the market in that we're the only, I would say, top 25 commercial card issuer in the U.S. who is our own processor, meaning that we run all of our own technology platforms. So we've got ultimate flexibility and nimbleness in addressing customer need. Okay. Let's talk about, we're going to talk about virtual credit cards and what they are. And then we'll follow this with a question to you guys around your relative experience, because it certainly helps me in going through our presentation to know, and that'll be in a bit, right? Oh no, we don't do that question. Okay, sorry. So let's start on what is a virtual credit card. So it's a single-use credit card, and it is dynamically created for the value of the invoice or invoices that are being paid. And when you're looking for a virtual card provider, you want to make sure that that provider will integrate into your ERP system so that from an AP standpoint, the process is really pretty seamless. And instead of generating a check file as you would generate a check file that would be converted to a credit card payment file that your provider could then issue the card. So if I'm paying, an invoice for $1,287.32, when I submit that payment for processing, that is the value of the card that would be created. Single use, they are typically single use. We encourage single use transactions, but based on the needs or limitations of an individual vendor, you could certainly choose to have multiple transactions allowed on that. So the value of virtual cards, Ernie talked early on about this group is seeking to save money and have more efficient processes. A virtual card program allows you to turn your AP department into a revenue generator by earning rebate. The costs are minimized because the process is going to or should replicate what your check process is, meaning it's no extra effort from AP to implement. Virtual cards are easy to administer, unlike checks with positive pay files and manual processes around that. This can all be handled through integration to and from your ERP. And the security, we talk about the fraud, locking that transaction down to a specific amount and for a specific period of time, because virtual cards typically have an expiration date of 1, maybe 2 months. So they're open for a very short time. As those funds are spent, so in the $1,272 example, once that transaction's processed, the card is dead. The limit, unlike with a traditional corporate card or even your own personal cards, that limit is refreshed with every every cycle billing. With a virtual card, that is not the case. So it will never replenish. Okay, and it obviously allows you guys to leverage terms and floats. So, you know, when you make a payment to your vendor, you would then have upwards to, we'll call it 30 days until you need to repay your virtual card issuer. All right. Next slide. How does it work? So as I said, you know, inside your ERP, you should work as you currently work today. When the payments are submitted, that, and I'll say loosely, checks file, although it's for the credit cards, will be generated and sent to your provider. In this example, I'm using Comdata. We or your provider would create a virtual card number and expiration date, the CVC code to process it, and email that card information to your supplier. The supplier then is going to process that credit card just like they would any other credit card. So they might key it into a physical terminal or enter it into a virtual terminal. And it will process through the network accordingly and come back to your card provider, who will obviously invoice you for those transactions. Okay? Ernie, happy to pause if we've got any questions thus far.
Yeah, can you just clarify a little bit how that works, like a positive pay file, for us, a little color around there?
Yeah, so, well, within a positive, and you don't have you don't have a positive pay file with a virtual card transaction, but I would say, like the check process, you will create the file that said, I'm going to, produce a check. And then you will get a response file, maybe the positive pay file, that says these are the checks that have been issued. Likewise, in the credit card process, you can get a file back that says, and these were the cards or masked cards or tokens, depending on the capabilities of your provider, that have been issued. That allowing you to always, just like you do with checks, connect, if that vendor were to call you with a question on the invoice, you would have a connection between the invoice and the payment that's been provided. And then likewise, just like checks, when you get a clearing file back on checks from your bank, you should get a clearing file of cards back from your card issuer, letting you know which are the transactions that you're being asked to pay for, because they've cleared through the network.
Okay. Yeah. One more quick question. As far as the type of card transaction, is that dependent on the provider, such as Comdata? Is it a MasterCard? Is it a Visa? How does that determine, or how does that work?
Yes, that is definitely a component of the of your issuer. They'll decide that. Do I believe that there is huge difference between someone taking a Visa, someone taking a MasterCard? I do not. They're generally accepted the same amount by suppliers. So what it may do for you based on your issuer's capabilities is both of those networks will have their own tools that they offer to issuers, and in some cases, issuers who maybe don't have much of a solution themselves can leverage those solutions from the networks. It really depends on the provider. I would say, focus on that provider giving you integration, giving you timely rebates. There are some big ticket items that I think really distinguish one issuer or provider from the other. Typically, network, I would not say, is one of those points of differentiation. Okay?
Okay, great. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, so let's talk about, for a successful program, you really have to be engaged with all of the stakeholders. So top of the house, you have the CFO and or the controller, who's going to be really that decision maker, interested in maximizing rebate, interested in eliminating costs. You've got the accounts payable team, and they obviously are seeking greater efficiency, and they'd like to contribute to the business. So being able to generate some revenue is certainly a motivation for them. And procurement, procurement's interested in those vendor relationships. They want the lowest price. They want to maximize discounts. And we believe that where you have some great success is when from the beginning of the program, you're actively working with all of those stakeholders. So procurement understands the quantification of the value of the program. Procurement understands, ways that they can incorporate card acceptance into their standard contracts. And procurement understands that, the reality is, in many instances, card acceptance has already been baked into the price. So for you to not request card as your form of payment may contribute to you not maximizing the value from that deal. And in some instances, we see customers who will actually pay a portion of their rebate or allocate a portion of their rebate to their procurement team. So I'd say you really need to sort of individually look at, what is it going to take to get procurement as a leading spokesperson for your e-payables program. From a CFO perspective or controller, obviously having that executive buy-in is something that's very important, because if your organization doesn't believe in and put their strengths behind the success of your e-payables program, I think that you'll struggle really reaching anywhere beyond what would be the average sort of return. And so if you want a highly successful program, having that buy-in from your leadership is key to the program. And so how do you engage those champions? I think that when you're engaging that CFO or controller, first and foremost, you need to be able to present a compelling business case. What will happen in most cases, or should happen when you engage suppliers on the search for a program, is they can take a look at your accounts payable file, and they can do some level of matching to get a determination or a rough estimate of what value could you have by converting some of those vendors to take card. And they can, both Visa and MasterCard offer tools that your issuers can use to determine if the vendor is in the network. One caution I would give you, though, is that those tools are only looking to see, is this a vendor who accepts credit cards? It doesn't necessarily tell you that it is a vendor who accepts commercial cards. So you should understand if your supplier, has the ability to, if your provider or issuer has the ability to match the vendors in your AP file to their own database, ones that they know have been paid, right? Because if they can do that, then they can give you a much more, I think, reliable estimate. Now, barring that you have that data, I would share with you the RPMG study. RPMG is, these are two gentlemen, Richard Palmer and Mahendra Gupta, who have studied the purchasing card market for a long time and recently have done a study specific to e-payables. And they say that, and they have this off slightly, but somewhere in the neighborhood of 1.5% of company annual revenue is a reliable prediction of what the value of your e-payables program could be. That for best, you know, I think they're best in class, that moves from a 1.5 to like a 2.5%. We measure and benchmark our customers at Comdata. We can see in certain industry verticals that number to be as high as like 7 to 11% of company annual revenue. So if you just need a good guide to sort of figure out if it's worth it to you to begin this journey, I would conservatively recommend that you use 1.5% of company annual revenue to tell you what your spend is. And then if you want to quantify that in terms of return, use, you know, conservatively 1% or 1.25% of that to estimate what your rebate might be. Okay, but that quantification in the business case is going to be key to your CFO. They're going to want to know, you know, how are you doing? So we tell you, you need to, you know, publish your program results. You need to create standard reporting out to your company leadership so that they see how you're performing against your estimates. And we actually recommend that you budget that revenue, because there's no greater motivation than, hey, I've got a number I need to hit for budget. And so that can really be a great motivation. Okay. And then lastly, I would say make sure that your champion is engaged, because very often, you know, a supplier is willing to accept card because you've told them that it's important to you that they accept card. And so sometimes you've got to leverage that CFO, maybe CEO, to call and let the, you know, your vendor in a strategic relationship understand its importance. Okay. The AP team, you know, I think one of the most important groups, or the most important group, is AP. And I can tell you that years ago, when we first started selling an e-payable solution, we were focused on that decision maker. And what we failed to recognize is that you don't have an excitement in AP, and those are the people who are talking to your vendors, then you're not going to have a successful program. We have seen, as an example, you know, that we do the vendor enrollment on behalf of our customers and provide that service in-house. And we may have gone and enrolled all of these vendors, projected a great amount of spend, but if you're allowing your AP team to unenroll vendors in your card program, then, and they don't clearly understand what's in it for them, what is the value to your company, then for them it's just going to be, oh, I'm getting a call, they want to be taken off of card, I will stop this conversation by saying, sure, no problem, and get them off of card. We actually recommend that you tell your AP team you don't have the authority to unenroll a vendor and that you have to escalate. So at least for their benefit, they're not burdened with having, you know, to make that call, and you know, you make it a little bit more difficult for the vendor, so they have to think twice about We also believe you can incent your team. We've seen great success when customers create contests. They offer, casual days or movie tickets or pizza parties or whatever it is that your individual team finds to be a motivation. Connect into that and feed it, because it can really pay back quite significantly for your company. Okay. On the procurement team side, as we talked about, in the stakeholders, but helping them to understand, how to negotiate card as part of a contract, for them to, bake it into their conversations from the beginning of the conversation makes it a heck of a lot easier. And then, as with your AP team, think about, rewarding them. It's amazing how much just recognition can be a motivation for people, and you can find great success just by, calling out how many vendors have they sent to you who, they have marked as being card accepting from the beginning. If you have maybe a form that they have to fill out, have, bake into the form a checkbox for card acceptance and, a note to explain that they've talked to them about card acceptance. Lots of things you can do to encourage that team. Okay. Next, Ernie.
All right. I think we're ready for our next polling question. So I've gone ahead and launched our next polling question, asking the audience to share with us what they see as the greatest obstacle for implementing an e-payables program at their company. So again, appreciate everyone's consideration in answering the polling questions. And again, we'd love your questions. We're getting some questions in, so we'd love even more questions in the questions area of your GoToWebinar control panel. So we will go ahead and leave the polling question out for another 15 seconds or so, and then we'll get Mitra's initial feedback, and then also ask her to add her color into, as we address those obstacles, what she's seen her customers being successful in terms of removing those obstacles. A little color commentary from my experience in the treasury industry is a lot of times some of the benefits to AP are things that they're able to focus on more strategic activities. They're not on the phone as much with disputes. So there's great benefits to the AP team to engage. Expressed very well. There are really two constituencies here. The CFOs and those you have to convince if it's an investment in some sort of automation technology, but also those that are going to execute the program. So you want to make sure you get buy-in from both of those groups. So I'm going to go ahead and close the polling question, and I'm going to go ahead and share those results. And it looks like we've got, not surprisingly to me, 44% challenging to change current processes and other priorities, executive buy-in, and already having e-payables program, which is great. So, Mitra, what are your initial thoughts here on the results?
Well, I guess I would say I'm not surprised by the results. I would say that, in terms of lacking executive buy-in, one of the best things that you can do is to maybe even give your, executives a rough estimate of what the program could be in value to them. When we say we have other priorities right now, I always think, wow, really, how many other priorities do you have that will earn you money in AP? And the thing that I would challenge you with in an accounts payable environment is, launching an e-payables program for many, many, many of our customers is their mechanism for funding the I need more staff, I need to upgrade my ERP, I need an imaging solution. Whatever the answer is, when you can start to generate money from an e-payables program, it's a lot easier for you to justify those other investments. Challenging to change the current process, amen. I think that's the answer for whatever you might be implementing. That certainly isn't unique to an e-payables program, but I think it can be made to be a fun and team-oriented activity.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think what I see when I'm advising people to build a business case is you want to engage these people when you're putting your program together, sit down with them and understand how their processes might change and show them how it's going to make their life better, more efficient. It's going to give them more time to do things. And then those people that are most resistant to change, those people often have the biggest voice. So if you can engage those people, they actually end up being your biggest evangelists. So if you can get them on your side, take them out to lunch, like Mitra said, make it fun. I think those are the people, once you turn them, that really kind of turns the tide. And if you're in a meeting and they're actually championing what you're doing, I think that's really gonna really tip the balance for you.
That's right.
All right, so let me go ahead and move on, which is also extremely important. And we talked about making the business case on how to create the alignment among your stakeholders. Mitra?
Yeah, so I mean, this is, to me, sort of a summary of how do you bring all of those key stakeholders together, right? Because we've talked about you've got to have the executive buy-in. I think it's very important to designate a program owner because you have to actively manage your e-payables program. There are a couple of, and I have made the point to say, look, you need to find a provider for who will give you a process that can replicate a lot of your current processes. So you don't want to have to take on a lot of integration work yourself or process changes. That said, let's be clear, particularly when you are in the throes of implementation, this will represent more work for you at the beginning so that you can get to a state of less work. But I would be very, very skeptical of anyone saying things like, we do all the heavy lifting, you don't have to do anything. I mean, this is a change to your organization. You need to be aware of that going in. And I think by having a program owner, you've got somebody from the beginning who can manage expectations of stakeholders, who can, keep your organization focused. So, the targets that you set are being measured towards achievement, and you can know, are you doing well, are you not? We actually have we worked with our customer advisory board to create some job descriptions of what that program owner does, what they look like, because, I think a lot of folks struggle with how do you kind of justify that. And again, it all comes back to that business case that says, I've quantified the value of what it can represent. This is what I've got to do, because I think anybody hearing a business case is going to immediately ask, yeah, but what's this going to mean for our organization? And if you say, oh, nothing, it's no big deal, I think that's going to be met with skepticism. Make sure that everybody understands their roles. Communication is key. And as we said, as I said earlier, I really believe in setting goals. Ask your provider for some benchmarks. How should you perform, and how are you performing compared to your peers? And then most importantly, celebrate your success when you achieve goals. Make this a fun project. One of the examples I will give you, and I'll use ourselves, when we at Comdata launched our own e-payables program with AP. We always say, hey, you should name your program, right? Give it a name. If it's Fast Pay, Easy Pay, Rapid Pay, you know, we've had some customers who've actually created a logo for their program, which, you know, I think allows people to really get creative. We did a contest where we solicited, you know, input from the from our teams on, you know, how did they want to name it, and we gave them a couple of options to vote on for logos, and made it a game, and it was really, it turned out to be a lot of fun. Okay. All right. So maybe here we go. Next slide. So what does success look like? I will, as I had said earlier when I referred to the RPMG data, that the average e-payables program represents 1.5% of your company annual revenue, but you know, you can achieve easily 4% is what our average is within Comdata. And use that as a benchmark of whether you're achieving success. Because if you're not hitting 4% of company annual revenue in your e-payable spend, then there are likely changes that you need to make. Maybe you don't have the right provider, although it looked like on this call nobody has a current program. You know, you really want to make sure you're picking the right partner. You want to make sure that you're doing continuous vendor enrollment. So don't believe that this is one and done, you've launched and that's all you're going to get. You're onboarding new vendors all the time and need, you know, need someone, really, I think, this dedicated program manager who can help you keep your success in the forefront of goals and targets. And then lastly, look, you've got to establish your goal. You've got to set a budget for what you're expecting to earn in rebate. I would contend you want to make sure that that rebate is being earned monthly. Don't accept a provider who's going to tell you, no, we'll pay you, you know, once a year in arrears, because somebody's making that money as soon as the transaction happens. And I think it should be you and not your provider. So make sure you're asking those questions as well. Okay. So Ernie, I think we're open for more Q&A if we've had any other questions or comments even.
Oh, sure, absolutely. So we're going to formally open our Q&A session. So we have some questions. Please ask more questions in the questions area. If you go to webinar control panel, we'll go through our Q&A questions, and then I will insert our last polling question at the tail end of our Q&A session. So not surprisingly, Mitra, a lot of the questions are coming around how do you get your suppliers to participate in the program. So that seems to be the inherent barrier here, maybe some hesitation there. So is there any more color you can give us around how to get that acceptance or tactics? I know in certain cases the providers help with that, but I think it's almost something that people are even afraid to broach in terms of that negotiation, and they don't accept cards as a practice.
Yeah. So I would say, you know, the way you need to look at your program is there is first and foremost some level of what I'll call low-hanging fruit. These are, you know, suppliers who accept cards, accept them as a matter of course, some of whom actually prefer them because it's just part of their standard process and they don't have to deal with, you know, there's a hassle for creating a check. Well, there's a hassle for receiving a check too. So they don't have to deal with that. And typically those are your, you know, what I would call lower end, lower value vendors. Then you will have a swath of these guys who might take card currently, but they do it in a retail consumer setting, and therefore it's likely that the acquiring rates that they're paying are pretty high. In the commercial card space, we have a concept called level 3 data, and basically it's like if the richer the data is that the merchant or acquirer sends with the transaction, the less that it costs them. Well, if they're typically working in a retail environment for consumer, they're likely not taking advantage of those programs, so they're paying higher rates. One of the things that we offer, and you should check with with providers to see if they offer as well, is we have a merchant acquiring partner who specializes in B2B payments and who can typically drive down the cost of acceptance pretty significantly. They may go from an average of north of 4% that they're paying for a transaction, and you can get them down to at or less than 2%. So it's definitely worth, and we have found, like, one of our customers who's in the restaurant business, they were able to make this acquiring introduction to one of their produce vendors, and actually created a win for the produce vendor in dropping their annual acquiring fees like over $75,000, because there's no reason that you couldn't just better all of their card acceptance, not just benefit from you taking them taking your cards, but for the whole space. So I'd say that's a great way, because that demonstrates that you're a partner with your merchant, and that you're willing to work with them to get them a good deal. And actually, we've seen studies done. We commissioned a study a couple of years ago with MasterCard and Kaiser Associates, and polled suppliers and asked them, about what were their challenges, what were the benefits, why did they take card, and 26% said they take card because their customer asked them to, and they want to make their customers happy. So don't be bashful. I think you'll find that there's more of a willingness out there than you might expect.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So obviously, it's fantastic that you actually have implemented this program at your company as well. And can you give us a little more color around some of the unexpected challenges that you had when you went through the process, but also some of the unexpected benefits that you've realized internally in terms of maybe extra productivity impacts?
Well, I think from a surprise standpoint, for me personally, it was learning that our company is highly decentralized when it comes to procurement. Basically, if you work here, you have the ability to engage a vendor relationship. And I did not understand how challenging that decentralized procurement can be in terms of communication. Even with us being able to pick up the phone to our vendors and say, hey, come on, we're a credit card issuer, for Pete's sakes. Of course we want to pay you with a credit card. That being the heaviest, I guess, club that you would have, or enticement that you would have. Still, just keeping the team informed was our biggest challenge. And that's why I'm such an advocate of communicate. I also, believe it or not, as even given that this is our business, keeping our AP team excited and focused on the program is something that we've had to engage and re-engage, probably annually, just to keep it top of mind for them. that matters. In terms of an unexpected benefit, I think the unexpected benefit was the level of education that we had across our employee base. Given that, this is the business that we're in, it was still good to see every person in every corner of our company get a better understanding of what we do. So that was a benefit I had not anticipated.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. In terms of the benchmark that you mentioned, I could be misremembering. I think it might have been 4% of company revenue, and someone was asking, is it really company revenue, or is it our AP spend and ancillary? Is there also a benchmark we should have against our AP spend, or should it be against our total company revenue?
That is a great question, and the benchmark is used against company annual revenue because, frankly, your payable spend can vary pretty dramatically from company to company, and the amount of it that is cardable. So what RPMG found is that the only sort of consistent benchmark that gives you a solid average is against the company annual revenue.
Okay, fantastic. So along those same lines, is there a company size? Is there a number of invoices that makes the economics make sense? What are some of the drivers that really kind of tip the ROI and make that business case really compelling?
Yeah, I tend to think that, if you're a company who is, I don't know, let's call it sub 20 million in annual revenue, once you run the numbers on a percentage, call it 4% of, 20 million, and then take 1 to 1.5% of that, you can do the math to kind of see what's going to be of interest to you. Now, that said, I think it would also be true. Let's say you at that level can generate a program that's somewhere in, $20,000 of annual value. Well, it's also true that at a company that size, $20,000 is a lot more important than it would be for, a larger company. We tend to sell into, middle market, maybe in that 50 million upwards to $1 billion in annual revenue. And that's our sweet spot because it's also those groups, that size of company who is looking for a more customized solution. When you get to be above $1 billion in company annual revenue, you've got a lot more resources, and therefore, if your provider is unable to kind of customize around your processes, integrate into your specific ERP, it's not as challenging because you've got, a larger IT group that you can engage, or, more resources in an AP who can get involved to modify your process. We find that middle market segment is really hungry for, I need you to take work off of me, not put work on me. How can you make that happen? And given, that we're really more technology, that's how we would approach it. So I think it just depends on, on what is important to your company. And, but it is easy to run the numbers so you can get a rough estimate and make that determination.
Okay. Couple questions around this. I know it's going to be different, but what about international payments? Can you speak to that a little bit? Is that possible? Is it global cards? Does it depend on the provider? Is that available coming soon, or what is the landscape out there right now?
Yep. So definitely, and cards are, let's say MasterCard and Visa, Amex are accepted worldwide. And so there would be no reason that you couldn't pay for an international transaction. But that said, you are paying a typically about a 1 to 1.1% is for currency conversion and cross-border fees that are going to be assessed by the network, so MasterCard or Visa. So you are likely, you may just pay that. Maybe your provider marks up the transaction. So it could be on a international transaction that you will have you may not earn rebate on it, or you may not earn as much rebate on it given the fees that would be involved. When I look at our customer spend, though, and look at the amount of it that is foreign spend, there's still a good amount of it that's happening. I think customers would make that decision, though, not based on the rebate that they're going to earn, but on the ease of being able to give that card number to your provider, the security of locking that transaction down, and obviously the cost of an international wire. International wires lack any sort of transparency and can be very costly. So that I think you need to compare what the wire is going to cost you to what you wouldn't earn in rebate. Okay.
Right. All right. Just maybe one more question to be mindful of our time. Maybe two more. So one question that I often get from folks, and I'm not nearly as versed as you, obviously, is there like any 2 or 3 myths that you think are out there related to virtual cards and e-payables that you are always asked about? What are the common questions that you get that you think it would really increase adoption of e-payables if people, where it was just more common knowledge of these 1 or 2 things?
Oh, wow. Good question. I think that there is a myth that says my vendors aren't going to take card. That just people will say, nope, this isn't going to work for me. My vendors won't take card. And that is a fallacy. I think that there's a myth in the adaptability of AP. I think people can be very skeptical that AP teams can rally around programs like this and be successful. And we find, that they can be creative in their approach and highly successful and motivated for improvement. So I also think people don't really have faith that their teams are going to rise to the occasion and get it done.
Thank you. Fantastic. So I'm going to go ahead and close the Q&A session, or be mindful of our time. If we didn't get to your questions, we will do our best to follow up with you after the webinar. Just want to make a few comments. You'll have access to the slides you do right now, but we've also offered some additional resources which offer more color, article, Taking the Pain Out of Accounts Payable, several resources from ComData, some great white papers and resources there, 2017 AFP Payments Fraud and Control Survey. There's some great accounts payable professional LinkedIn groups. There's the AP2P network. So there's a lot of ways to connect with folks that are facing the same challenges you are and have reached that best-in-class e-payables program. So I'd like to once again thank our speaker, Mitra, for your great content and insights. Thank you very much, Mitra.
You're welcome.
We'd also like to thank our sponsor. Again, we appreciate and share their commitment to thought leadership, which is also evident in the great content and resources which they offer, which again, I encourage you to review by visiting their website. Please note you have the opportunity to request to be connected with our speakers and learn more about ComData in our post-webinar survey that I'll launch immediately following the webinar. And finally, a big thank you to you, our audience, for your valuable time. If you have any questions that we covered during the webinar or about Treasury Careers, please contact me at ernie@treasurycareers.com. Thank you very much, everyone, and make the rest of your day great.
Thank you.